different elements of a short story, including all of the elements that appear in Freytag's pyramid. I hope you like it. Good morning, buenos dias, good afternoon, buenas tardes, good evening, buenas noches, whenever it is that you get to see this. My name is Miss Adri and I'm here to teach you some stuff. And today we are going to talk about the elements of a short story or a narrative. Yes, this video can benefit not only you high school students, but also university students and teachers. So let's get this party started. Now, many of you know that stories or narratives are divided into different parts. And the first part is the plot. And the plot is basically the sequence or the order of events that occur in a story. And inside of plot, as you can see my little leaf, we have exposition, rising action, conflict, climax, falling action, and resolution. And I'm going to go inside of each one, if my computer decides to cooperate. There we go. Let me put myself in a little corner over here. So the different parts of the plot, as I mentioned, are exposition, and thus an exposition is basically the introduction of what is happening in my story. It gives me all of the backstory, all of the information that I need to know for the beginning, and it includes things like the setting, characters, and conflict. Immediately, or sometimes not as fast, we know the conflict of what's going on, or sometimes we think it's one thing and then it's another. Then we have the rising action, and rising action is all the different things, or most important things, that happen once we reach the climax of the story. Next, we have conflict, and conflict is the struggle or the problems between opposing forces. Now, conflict isn't usually, or doesn't necessarily have to be one thing against the other. It can be the same person against himself or herself, but we're going to talk about that a little further. Climax is the most important action that occurs within my story. Then I have the falling action, which is what's happening after that big moment, like my Bitmoji. And then the resolution, which is the end of the story, or perhaps the final outcome. Some other teachers call it denouement. There are other names. I prefer to stick with resolution because usually, unless it's a series like Harry Potter or Narnia, it ends with a very clear ending. Now, conflict, as I mentioned, is opposing forces. And a conflict is the problem that my central character or characters can encounter. Every story worth reading has conflict, and really, if there is no conflict, there is no tension, and many times there is no story. Some stories can have multiple conflicts. You can have one conflict that you see reflected within one chapter, and then it kind of flips on its head, etc. For example, a young boy gets lost on a camping trip. This could be a person against nature, or person against himself or herself, depending, well, himself, my goodness, against himself. Another example, two twin brothers want to take the same girl to prom. This would be person against person. And here are the different definitions. I'm going to move myself a little bit, and types of conflict. We have human versus human, where the central character faces opposition from another person or a group of people. We have human versus nature. I just realized that that is a typo. Let's pretend that it says human and not human. Versus nature. And this is where my central character struggles against animals, the elements, or anything that has to do with nature. Human versus self is when my central character has an internal struggle. Human versus supernatural, where my central character is challenged by forces that are not of this world. Human versus society, where my central character or a group of characters battle against traditions, institutions, the law, things like that. Human versus technology is when my central character struggles with or against the forces of technology. This is also called human versus machine. If you notice, I did not put man versus anything, because I think that we can be a little bit more inclusive in literature when it comes to this. So it's the same thing. Now we move on to setting. And the setting is not only where my story takes place, but also the when my story takes place. Does it take place in the Middle Ages? Does it take place in the future? Does it take place in the modern day? These are all things that have to do with setting. Does it take place in London? Does it take place in Puerto Rico? And inside of that, we have not only the geographical location, as I mentioned, the when, the historical period, day, month, etc. We also have things like weather. Is my story beginning with rainy conditions? Is it sunny? Is it stormy? The social conditions of my character or characters. This is also part of my setting. Is my character rich? Is my character poor? Is my character sort of in between? And also the mood and the atmosphere. And this is the feeling that a story can create. Is it a happy story? Is it a horror story? Does it make the reader feel dread? Does it make the reader feel glee? These are all questions that we need to ask ourselves. Next, we move on to characters, which a lot of people already know. We have our protagonist, which is the main character, basically the hero of our story. I use quotation marks because we can have an anti-hero, like Batman. And the antagonist, which is the character who opposes my protagonist and creates obstacles for the protagonist. Usually, if you're going to go with simple stories like a fairy tale, my protagonist would be, for example, Cinderella, and my antagonist would be her stepmother. Simple. Sometimes we can have stories that the conflict is a person versus himself or herself, and then the antagonist is the same person that is the protagonist. And inside of characters, we have these two classifications. We have dynamic or round characters, and these are characters that are complex, multidimensional, and they change along with the story. Basically, they begin being one way and then they grow up, they mature, something happens to them and it makes them change. Or we can have a static or flat character, and that is a character that never changes and only represents one characteristic. These are very common in children's stories because they're simple, and round characters are more common once we hit approximately 5th grade and on. Of course, we can have stories for young children that they have dynamic and round characters, but this is just an example. Now, theme is not the same thing as the title of the story. No. Theme is the main idea or the underlining meaning that that person, that author, is trying to state or kind of convey. We can have themes that are major, we can have themes that are minor. Basically, we can have the biggest theme. I'm going to take, for example, the play The Crucible. One of the major themes of that is how people can be manipulated through mass hysteria, etc. And one of the minor themes is perhaps adultery. These are themes. These are things that perhaps they're not plainly stated, but they're there, sort of hidden inside of the story or the play or whatever it is that I am reading. Basically, that's it. Major themes are usually the ones that have the most impact within the reader, and minor themes are just kind of underneath to prove some small point that the author wants to prove. Next, we have points of view. There are many points of view, but I'm going to stick with these. And the point of view is from what angle are we reading the story? Who is telling the story? We have first person point of view, or POV. They're both correct, it's just an abbreviation. And first person is when I am the narrator. It is being told through the character's eyes. I suffered, this happened to me, etc. And then we have third person. And this is told from the outside of a person that is not the character. We have different types of third person, but these are the most popular ones. We have third person omniscient, where my narrator knows everything that is going to happen, everything that's going to happen with the reader, with the character, etc. And they can read the character's innermost thoughts. Basically, they can read their mind. And then we have third person limited omniscient, which only knows what my central character knows. Basically, they know what that character is going to do in the next 5 minutes or in the next couple of pages, but they don't know what's going to happen with the rest of the characters. Now, all of these different elements, how do we organize them? Well, we organize them in this beautiful pyramid that is called Freytag's pyramid. Freytag's pyramid, I don't know why we have to call it that. We call it sometimes the mountain, sometimes we call it the roller coaster. I like to call it the mountain. And here we have my exposition, my rising action, my climax, my falling action, and my resolution, which you can't see too well. There we go. If I press on the presentation, you can see it. So that is it for this video. I hope that you liked it. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow me on all of my social media platforms. You'll see them, I don't know, somewhere after my face. Bye.